Miss America time. The shapeliest beauties in all America, 51 of them, parade at Atlantic City for the title. Overpowering all opposition is strapping 5'10", 143-pound Miss Utah. Nearby Asbury Park holds a quest for Mrs. America. She's got to cook as well as look. 32 married lovelies show they know potatoes have to be peeled. Bed making comes next. Into the beds go the testers. The best beds by Mrs. New York City. Feels comfortable. But it's the body beautiful that's the criterion for the well-rounded Mrs. America.
And finally, the winner. Watch out, Mrs. America.
Mrs. America was more than a contest. It was a new way of life. Women found themselves on a peculiar pedestal, honored as sexy, fertile homemakers.
Yes, wife can be beautiful.
Mrs. America set impossibly high standards. A loving mother, she had a figure like an hourglass and was as efficient as a sewing machine. She wore high heels when she scrubbed the floors and was as clean and pure as laundry detergent. She was to be the ultimate symbol of the new affluence. By the mid-50s, half the families in America had entered the middle class.
At last, my love has come along.
Women turned to magazines to learn how to adapt to their new roles in the land of plenty.
I think the mass magazines was in their interest to create this ideal American family because their interest was to sell consumer goods. The advertising is almost all directed at women. There's always a woman standing in front of a new refrigerator, a woman standing in front of a car. It was extremely powerful.
My heart was wrapped up in clover. The night
One woman who eagerly bought the message sold by the mass magazines was a young writer from New York, Betty Friedan. In 1952, like so many other Americans, she and her husband Carl moved to the suburbs.
We bought a house in Rockland County, and I did all the things that women as supposed to do those and enjoy them, you know. Chauffeuring the kids and the school board battles and tuna fish casseroles and liked it. It was enjoyable. I had 3 kids, and I loved my kids as far as that was concerned and liked having kids. But it was like an itch I couldn't quite suppress, that despite the fact that I now wrote housewife on the census blank, I wrote for freelance for women's magazines, sort of like secret drinking in the morning.
Friedan was popular with her editors until she began to write pieces about women who tried to balance a career with motherhood.
I wanted to write once an article about a woman who was a sculptor. I could write about her painting her child's crib, but I couldn't write about her serious work.
It'll be nice to be just a housewife where there'll be no great demand for either talent or brains. Why, Ellen Douglas, that's the silliest thing I've ever heard you say. Of course, you don't mean it. Certainly I mean it. All you have to know is what switch to turn, what buttons to push, and what cans to buy. Does Bill know he's marrying a can opener instead of a wife? Bill? He's in love with me. He'll never know the difference.
When I was just a little girl, I asked my mother, what will I be? Will I be pretty? Will I be rich? Here's what she said to me. Que sera, sera, whatever.
The women of Smith College, class of 1942, graduated full of intellectual rigor and ambition. One summa cum laude graduate, Betty Friedan, returned 15 years later for a class reunion. She was working on an assignment to find out if the ambitions of her classmates had been fulfilled. She asked them a series of questions. What difficulties have you found in working out your role as a woman? What are the satisfactions and frustrations of your life today? What do you wish you had done differently? In response, her classmates, most of them housewives, were deeply dissatisfied.
The future's not ours to see.
There was a whole lot of women, evidently, each one thinking she was alone, who didn't somehow experience an orgasm throwing the powder into the dishwashing machine.
During the reunion, Betty Friedan was also struck by the attitudes of the Smith undergraduates.
Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom.
According to one survey, half of all America's co-eds had dropped out of college either to marry or to avoid acquiring knowledge that might frighten men.
I remember at the reunion, I was talking to some of the seniors that were then graduating, and I said, which courses do you get all excited about? And these young girls would say to me, oh, we don't get excited about things like that. I spend every weekend with Jack that I'm engaged to and want to go have 3 kids or 4 kids. And when I heard this, and I thought, hey, what's happened?
In the 50s, even teen magazines pushed the idea of wedded bliss. By the end of the decade, over 14 million girls were engaged by the age of 17.
We want to get married, but we're so young.
Dating patterns also began to imitate marriage.
Before the war, there was a couplet, going steady with one date is okay if that's all you rate, if that's all you can get. Whereas after World War II, the rise of going steady was really linked with the rise of young marriage. Going steady was the mark of success, and that was a shocking development to a lot of their parents. The first reason, the most obvious reason, was sex.
Hello, Frank. Listen, the family says no, but I'll sneak out tomorrow night and meet you anyway. Okay? Swell.
A lot of the people who got married when they were 18 didn't see it as closing down their options, but as escaping into an exciting life where they don't have to live with their parents anymore, but can live with their husband or wife and have sex whenever they want to. And, you know, it was a great life as they saw it.
Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Bum, 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 bum. Make him the cutest that I've ever seen. Bum, bum, bum,
For these increasingly young wives, life was good, as the nation was in the midst of an economic boom. But in the women's magazines meant to guide young marrieds, life was almost too good. They set an impossibly high standard for family life, even as they suggested that homemaking should fulfill all of a woman's hopes and dreams.
This small, narrow domestic world, which does carry a strong emotional freight, was made to carry more than it should have.
When families did have problems, as they all inevitably did, they felt guilty. Betty Friedan found that many women liked their roles as mothers and wives, but resented the idea promoted by the women's magazines that no other role was possible.
Can't you be just a college professor's wife? Isn't that enough?
And play goes to your Hamlet. Oh, no, I'm not going to sit at home with the 4 walls and count pennies or alter myself to suit your friend's taste.
My work isn't important enough. I'm only a woman. He'd like me to be a slave to the house while some cutie on the paper whispers into his ear what a great big reporter he is.
As the decade progressed, women started going back to work. Though largely confined to dead-end jobs, nearly 70% of all middle-class wives worked outside the household to earn extra money for the family.
Families wanted all the goods that the abundant post-war America promised, and so women often would contribute to the household income. But what you see throughout the 1950s is a real praise of women in the home that keeps pushing the happiness that should come to women from being homemakers and mothers.
To describe these contradictory pressures on women, psychiatrists identified a new disorder, the housewife's blight. To cope with the problem, doctors began to prescribe antidepressants in record numbers. The drug of choice was Milltown.
Mr. Sandman, someone to hold, would be so peachy before we're too old. So please turn on your magic.
By 1957, 3 years after the drug's release, Americans had consumed 1.2 million pounds of Milltown.
Bring us our dreams.
Becoming more and more aware of a growing discontent, Betty Friedan tried to interest some of the women's magazines in an article on the issue, but none of her regular outlets would publish her findings.
The only thing I saw was an outline that said women have been brainwashed into being housewives, and it seemed to me pretty extreme. And so I said to her agent, I don't know what's happened to Betty, but I really am not interested in this.
And Red Book said, well, she's always written good stuff for us before, but she's gone off her rocker. Only the most neurotic women will identify with this.
To Friedan, part of the problem was that almost all of the women's magazines were run by men who were practicing a kind of unconscious censorship.
What I realized is that somehow what I had written threatened the basic foundation or the basic boundaries of women's world as seen and perpetuated by the women's magazines, which I called then the feminine mystique.
She set out to write a book with the same title. When it was finally published in 1963, it became the handbook of a new feminist movement.
What I underestimated was how that book, as a scream of pain, would resonate with so many women for so many years and lead them to rethink their lives.